if you guys would like.
Yeah, let's.
We have 30 people here now, so shall we start?
Let's wait just a couple more minutes, I think.
Okay.
If that's all right.
Yeah, I see several people are still signing in, actually.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Let me know when we don't have any more customers signing up.
And I'll take this opportunity to jump in and just give the pre-meeting spiel. So welcome everyone. If this is your first time joining us, everyone will remain muted throughout tonight's meeting, except the co-chairs and presenters. Following the presentation, co-chairs will call on members of the public that wish to speak. At that time, you can participate by going to the reactions icon and pressing the raise hand, but not the wave or thumbs up button, and only press it once, because if you press it a second time, your hand might go back down. If you're on the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. And at that time, be on the lookout for a prompt asking you to confirm unmuting once the co-chairs call on you. Please note the chat is for technical support only and to help with Zoom software problems and not to ask questions of the co-chairs. If you have an older version of Zoom, you'll need to go to the participants section also at the bottom of your screen, where you can find the raise hand feature there and click that button. And again, look for the unmuting prompt that will be sent to you. And finally, please do not raise your actual hand or wave at the screen because the co-chairs might not be able to see you. I can get over to Elizabeth and Anthony.
Okay. Well, welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming to the Zoning and Development Committee meeting tonight. We look forward to hearing your opinions on some very large issues. I am co-chair, as is Anthony Cohn, and he's going to introduce the first section.
Okay, and there's a proposal and actually a bill before the City Council called Planning Together, or at least that's the name of the proposal, put forward by Speaker Corey Johnson. And it is going to be a topic of the land use, the Community Board 8 land use meeting on Wednesday. Actually, the first topic where we will hear a presentation. But Elizabeth and I thought that it would be good if we got a kind of jump on it. And to that end, we've asked Paul Graziano, who is a planner and probably knows this bill as well as anyone, if not better, to speak to it a little bit as we start out. And so if you could turn on Paul's mic, he would.
Sure. I am looking for you. Oh, I see you. Go ahead, Paul. Try clicking the.
Go.
There you go.
Everybody can hear me?
You bet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming, attending. Some of you may know what's going on with this as it's been in motion for about 2.5, almost 3 months at this point. But for those of you who are unaware, let me give you a little bit of background. Back in December, I happened to be listening to the radio. It was actually, well, I think you know I'm the consultant on the opposition for the blood center, one of the people. So that was going on at the same time. And I happened to be listening to the radio. And all of a sudden, I heard the speaker have a quick snippet saying, I'm going to be introducing something tomorrow. It's going to be very big. And that was all I heard. And the next day, I saw that this report had been released called Planning Together. And the day after that, the bill was introduced to the city council. I started looking through the document because I am a planner and I'm someone who's done actual comprehensive planning, not just in New York, but in New Jersey and Connecticut and other places. And I immediately was disturbed as I started going through this document that this was not comprehensive planning at all, number one. And number two, a lot of the, what I describe as the pillars of the argument of the report are incredibly faulty, and not only faulty, but downright disturbing. So I started going through it, and you know, just for those of you who don't know, I live in Flushing, Queens. Okay, so I'm from sort of a suburban area in Flushing, and I've lived here my whole life. And I was involved during the Bloomberg administration when they were doing a lot of the contextual rezonings that took place around the city, particularly in Queens. I actually designed many of them, including for my own neighborhood, et cetera. So I'm very, very familiar with what occurred between 2002 and 2013. As I said, I was substantially involved in it. One of the first things that jumps out in this report is a statement made over and over again, multiple times, that white wealthy neighborhoods were contextually rezoned and lower income neighborhoods of color were given upzonings. So I was very concerned about this because, again, having done a lot of these contextual rezonings, I started looking at them. And of course, my memory served me correctly. As I went through these rezonings in Queens, 34 of them between 2005 and 2013, only 12 of them were in majority white neighborhoods. So that just tells you right there that the math is off. And this goes throughout the entire city. So again, the premise of this bill is to address inequities throughout the city and to create this comprehensive planning process, quote unquote, I said that in quotations, that will equitably distribute both needs and wants throughout the city of New York on a decade by decade basis. So as I started looking at it, as I said, the first issue, the main pillar of this is wrong. They used two case studies. One case study is Seattle, and the other case study is Minneapolis. And again, typically when you're a planner, you don't just look at two case studies for something that would be as wide-ranging and disruptive as this Planning Together report would be. This Planning Together report, this intro and bill would literally upend land use in the city of New York. It's the biggest thing that's been considered in over 50 or 60 years, probably since the zoning resolution was created in 1961 and put into place. So this is not, this isn't even ZQA-MIH, which was a pretty big deal. This is way beyond that. So when I see something that's being introduced that's going to turn over, land use in the city of New York, and it only uses 2 case studies, my antenna went up as well. And the first case study is looking at Seattle and how they come at comprehensive planning. Now, I've been to Seattle many times. I've actually studied planning in Seattle and Portland and cities in California and Colorado and in Chicago and a lot of other cities in the United States. And the one thing that we have that sets us apart and makes it almost impossible for our land use to be compared to any other place is that we have this little thing called as of right. So when you're looking at comprehensive planning, it doesn't really work. You can't really take the framework of comprehensive planning and glue it onto New York City zoning and our processes, because we have this as of right thing, which again, outside of places like in Texas, there aren't really many major cities in the United States that follow this. So that's my statement on Seattle. And my statement on Minneapolis was that their other case study focuses on the fact that last year, before the pandemic started, the city of Minneapolis decided to eliminate single-family zoning from the city of Minneapolis. Now, the city of Minneapolis has about the same population of Staten Island. It has the same land area as Staten Island. It has the same demographics as Staten Island. And it's also, up until this elimination, was zoned 70% single family. And New York City, for those of you who don't know, is zoned 15%, 1-5. So again, the application of the idea of, and again, Speaker Johnson's office has denied that this was the intention of this case study. We would never eliminate single family zoning. This is what they're saying. But the idea that this is being lauded in this report as a remarkable achievement, it's just not consistent with the land use patterns that we have in New York City. So those are sort of a bunch of other red flags that came up in the report. In addition, the idea that we would have to create comprehensive planning in the city of New York. And again, I'm not against comprehensive planning, but the way that this bill and the legislation is written really doesn't do that at all. It creates 10-year cycles of comprehensive development, upzoning, and housing starts. And I think that that's the important thing to look at, is actually what's written in the actual legislation. The legislation, you can write all kinds of rosy projections and, as I described, puppy dog tails and lollipops and rose-colored glasses. But when you look at what's written in the actual legislation, it doesn't jibe with the idea of comprehensive planning at all. It is a very top-heavy, top-down process, even more so than we have today, which I know for some people is probably hard to believe, but it's the truth. And in addition, the way the mechanisms are created, it actually removes community input. It removes the ability for members to have the ability to do what we call member deference, which again is not written into law, but is a custom in the city since the charter revisions in 1989, 1990, where the member, if there's a terrible rezoning that's being proposed, the member can come forward and say they're against it. And if it's a local issue, the other members tend to fall in line over that. This would actually remove a good amount of member deference in a 10-year cycle. So that's the nuts and bolts of it. What I started to do was, about 3 weeks into looking at this, I put together a position paper. I'm not sure, Anthony, you can nod yes or no. I forwarded this information to the committee. I assume this has been disseminated to the members of the committee. Okay, so you've already seen my materials. I put out this letter and I started going from community board to community board and presenting what I felt was the accurate view of what this bill would do, and a lot of the red flags that are coming up through it. And again, I'm happy to go through some of that on detail. And if that happens, I can call on the district manager and staff to post it up, and I can kind of walk people through some of that. So as of today, in a very short period of time, I've gotten the majority of community boards just in Queens in unanimous opposition to this. I've also talked with members in Brooklyn, Staten Island, Manhattan, et cetera. And so far, there has not been a single community board that has been in favor of this. In addition, and this to me was kind of mind-boggling, when this was rolled out, not a single community board was notified. So when this rolled out in December, nobody knew about it. I started contacting the community boards. They were dumbfounded. They had no idea what this was. Then 3 weeks ago, when I actually went head-to-head with the co-author of this report at a community board meeting, where she told everybody that everything I'm saying is inaccurate, everything I'm saying is a falsehood, this isn't true. The day after that happened, when the Land Use Committee voted unanimously to oppose it, Corey Johnson put out an email attacking me personally, but it was an internal email only to other council members and their staff. They then followed this with an announcement that they were having a public hearing. But again, that public hearing announcement only went to internal council email, never went to the community boards. And again, I contacted community boards because it was forwarded to me through some of my contacts. And every community board I contacted said, no, we haven't heard about it. Or if they heard about it, it was through their council contacts. It was not directly, there was no notification to the council, from the council to the general public or to the community boards. When the public hearing happened last week, it was also a very interesting public hearing. It went for almost 7 hours on Zoom. They only allowed 100 people into the meeting. There were over 700 people in the waiting room. And they also spent 4 hours attacking Marissa Lago, who is the chair of the City Planning Commission, followed by, and many of you are familiar with the process, usually they set up panels for and against in rotation. So first they'll have 3 or 5 people speaking in favor of the bill, then they'll have 3 or 5 people in opposition, and the council members will ask questions. The speaker and the opera director, governmental operations committee chair set it up so that all of the panels were in favor for close to 2 hours. And then as soon as the opposition panel started, which I was on one, obviously, all the council members left. So there were literally 3 council members left at the end of, by the time the opposition started speaking. So it was not a normal hearing. And it was also not a normal hearing as the council members, particularly council members Johnson, Lander, and Reynoso, who are both 2 co-sponsors of the bill, mercilessly attacked the chair. And the chair had to keep reminding them that this was their own bill. So why are you attacking us? Why are you attacking? We didn't put up a bill for you to consider. You put up a bill and you're attacking us when it's your bill. So as I said, this is like some of the craziness that has gone on over the last almost 3 months about this. Needless to say, even those folks who are in favor of this bill, and I implore you, if you have 6 hours and 45 minutes to waste in your life, you should probably watch this video from last Tuesday. The whole situation was very bizarre, and frankly, even those people who were in favor of the bill, no one, not a single person or organization in favor of the bill stated that the legislation should be approved as it is. All of them pushed for very strong recommendations to change major portions of the bill. My position, and the position that I've been asking community boards to take, is to withdraw this bill. This bill has a fatal flaw. As I said, the fatal flaw is that it's based on a lie. And this runs through the entire report. That in itself should disqualify this bill from moving forward. If they want to come forward with a new bill that actually focuses on real comprehensive planning, then they should start from scratch, and they should solicit opinion from the public and from community boards, where you really are the first level of engagement with the public, not from the top and then kind of presenting it and saying, here's what we've come up with. Oh, you don't like it? Well, then you should come up with some amendments to it. That's not the way you should legislate, in my opinion. And as someone who's written legislation that's been adopted by the city council, I am the author of a number of zones that have been adopted. And I've also written amendments that have been adopted. So you start with the people at the bottom and you bring it to the top, not the other way around. So that's sort of a very brief overview, and I'm happy to go into deep specifics, and I'm sure you're going to want some details. But as I said, I know the committee has seen my response, my appendices, and my most recent response, which is the testimony that I gave in, which will be published. It was supposed to be published today, but it's supposed to be published in City Limits in the next couple of days. So as I said, I don't want to overstate it, but I'm sure that I'll be asked many questions. So maybe I should open it up to that. As I said, yeah. I don't want to kill anybody with specifics if people have already gone through it.
No, but I have a question actually.
Sure.
And it's a very specific question. What is it about as of right zoning that is inimical to comprehensive planning?
Well, as of right, well, because comprehensive planning, yeah, it's a good question. Comprehensive planning, by nature, everything, even within a comprehensive plan, in every other city where comprehensive planning exists, approvals still have to be gotten after the comprehensive planning has been created, right? So in other words, you're creating a comprehensive planning, a framework, and you're creating this 10-year plan, but at the end of the day, even within that plan, approvals still need to be approved by the planning commission or the planning authority or the planning board. So now you're in a situation where the comprehensive plan will be approved. And this is, I didn't really get into the details about this. And here in the city, as we know, if something if a zone is created, and as long as someone meets zoning code and building code, they file their plan and they go in. What I'm saying is that in all these other places, they still have to go back for additional approvals. And the statement that the city is making, or that Speaker Johnson is saying in this bill, is we're not getting rid of ULURP. We're not changing ULURP. We're not touching it. We're not amending the charter. Meanwhile, at the top of the bill, it says an amendment to the city charter. And what they're doing is they're not changing ULURP. They're going around ULURP.
Yes. And
that's what's most disturbing, because we all know ULURP is an incredibly imperfect system. We know this. It's not a great system. But to create a new framework on top of an imperfect framework, and the new framework is a top-down framework where Robert Moses type director and a new steering committee board and a new bureaucracy that will literally answer to nobody. And the Chair Lagos stated something very interesting. Again, their issue, the city's issues, by the way, the mayor is opposed to this bill. The chair was there as his representative, and they're against it, I think, for some reasons that we may not be, like we're against it for other reasons probably. But one of the reasons she brought up, and I think it's a fair figure, is the inordinate cost that this is going to cost. They're estimating it at $500 million per decade, because the way this is structured, and again, I don't think people know how this is structured, or if they do, they're not entirely aware. Every community board will have to have 3 land use scenarios created, which comes out to 177 EISs. 177 per community board. Now, those of you who don't know, to do an EIS, even for a single building, is extremely expensive. I guarantee the Blood Center has spent millions of dollars on this already. We already know this, that they have a budget for this because it's $1 billion building. So think about a community board wide EIS. I did 500 block rezonings in Queens. These were massive rezonings that I did, okay? That took years to have the EIS done for them. And they were relatively simple because we're dealing with lower density areas for the most part. But we're talking about community board-wide EISs, 3 versions for each one. That's where their estimate comes from. And frankly, I think it's a low estimate. I don't think it's an outrageous estimate at all. I think she gave the example during the meeting of one particular project. It might have been East New York, the East New York rezoning, which happened a few years ago. It took 5 or 6 years for it to be adopted. And just that one was upwards of $45 million for the EIS. So again, this is a very difficult square to circle to begin with, and it's built on a rotten foundation. So I don't see how it's possible to bring it forward. And as I said, anytime you want to actually look and go through the legislation, we can pop that up and I can go through it with people. Okay.
I think that Elizabeth and I talked about this yesterday. It was only yesterday. In contrast to the way we usually do things, I think if we have questions and comments or from board members first, and then we'll speak to the public. Just one quick reminder, this is a long agenda and with complicated issues, and so try and keep your comments and questions as brief as possible. That's just a kind of, and don't repeat yourselves. Okay.
Anthony, actually, I just want to reiterate that for those calling in from the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute.
And so we'll start taking people in order. Marco has had his hand up for quite a while. And so Marco, wherever you are. Not on my screen. There you are.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Anthony. Well, to Mr. Graciano, I think you're wrong, absolutely wrong. First of all, this is not a plan. This is just only an assessment of the reality. Let me give you the assessment what's going on right here. Oh, hold on, please. Planning together is not a plan. This is an assessment of the present condition of the city. This document analyzes where we are, such as agency working independent from each other without a common goals, and sometimes working against each other without no accountability to anyone or no transparency. This creates a deep disparity in the neighborhoods. One of lack of investment, large deficit of affordable housing, and homelessness. To give an idea, the perfect system that you are talking, the perfect system that you are talking, or imperfect system that you're talking, the city has been spending $2 billion of dollars to house the homelessness, when those houses can be housed in 1 floor. So let me go deeper. In wealthy neighborhoods, which is not your area, but I know very well your area, by the way. In wealthy neighborhoods with dense population is the opposite. Real estate is very solid and with great incentives like the free rights, the free air rights. This motivated some developers to rezone their land with discretionary actions in contextual districts, despite the existence of the strict controls of land use and high limits. This is happening in our neighborhood. In other cases, the developers are proposing their own zoning districts and have then immediately modify them as the proposed block center. It's something unique. They do not exist in the block center, that zoning. They said C2 do not exist, because you compare with C2, do not exist at all. Consequently, this has resulted not compatible with the spirit of the existing rules, changing dramatically the character of our residential district to a medical district, the institutions. These actions are impacting in overcrowding mass transportation. That's what we suffer right here, because people from your area are coming to work right here. The stifling traffic conditions, tenants harassment, uncontrollable demolition and reduction of affordable housing without no limit. Let me give you an example. A development on 83rd Street and 3rd Avenue, one block away from the major new Southwest Avenue, 14 billion investment from the city. The developer demolished 5 dwelling units with total of 5 buildings with 40 affordable units to build 84 luxury buildings. So that means what happened in our neighborhood, there is no control of Mrs. Lago. Mrs. Lago, when we present any resolution to us, she tried to neglect our comments, our request. They put anything against us. The community facilities. This is the only district in the entire city that have 5.1, while the other community facility has 4. And we have been delaying submit an application, and they throw it to the garbage. Until today, we don't know. This is more than 14 years ago. In our district, we don't have rezonings. No, there is none. The only thing we have is what is called Euler. And Euler has been appropriated by the developers, by the medical facilities. They take advantage of the free air rights. I calculate, and all of them is $100 million. And this is, as a matter of fact, this number is real for the blood center. So furthermore, let me go forward. At the national level, most of the people that die from COVID-19 are African American and Hispanics. At the city level, it's the inverse. Why? Because in Queens, the approach of zoning was never changed, and the demand of housing is great. The outcome is crowdedness with the lack of ventilation. This is why
Marco,
I almost
excuse
finished. Okay. Because
okay.
he make a very strong statement, and I think it's completely wrong what he's doing. And Elmore Hospital was the center of the pandemic. This is a lack of coherent planning, disruptive planning. This is wrong. If you're talking about the development in Queens, all of them are frame houses. If you don't know, the building code doesn't allow to have 3 family houses in frame houses. So never can go higher. The biggest concern that usually have is the side yards and the front yards. Let me finish with this one. Should this is an imperfect system? No, absolutely no. We have to stop this pattern. We need a plan, a real plan. The new alternative is planning together. My understanding of this plan is that the planners will collect information from the community, and then later we'll discuss 2 or 3 alternatives, like you said. But this plan, we had 2 phases, and it's very smart, because techniques of planning, you cannot planning most of the planners. One of the biggest problems of the planners is they enclose each other in a desk, and they think very careful, and they suppose everybody think about the 5, 6, 7, or 10 years coming with a beautiful program, which is unrealistic, because the city already moved in the wrong direction. And this plan makes a lot of sense. They ask for community participation. Mr. Corey Johnson said it's planning from the bottom up. And now you are contradicting that. So Marco, I had to finish the sentence, and you cannot stop me, because the argument that he writes is completely baseless. That's what I found it. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
I think we are part of the discussion of this whole plan. I think we must focus solely on the effect on zoning, because the community board will be taking up the proposal in total. And I would hope that we could be, as we ask questions, and I think it's more important to get information at the moment, and then when we feel we have enough information, make our recommendations. But let's keep it very succinct and very focused on the effect on zoning in this proposal.
Okay. I think, I don't know if you can see, Elizabeth, so I'll just go ahead and call on people. Alita is next, actually.
Go ahead, Alita.
Thanks. I actually wanted to ask about the top-down, bottom-up approach and why, but I think based on what Elizabeth just said, maybe that's something that we should talk about next week, is what happens with community boards and what is the substitute mechanism for the very little community involvement that there is in that. But the zoning, the impact on zoning, on what happens to as of right, and I think the idea that if there are certain standards set up, that applicants no longer have to prove the validity or establish the validity of their project any longer, as long as there's some kind of compliance with those standards. And that's something that may overlay zoning. I'm just confused, I guess, but maybe those are questions for the next meeting. So I'll just stop, and I guess you don't need to answer them. Thank you.
No, go ahead.
No.
And actually, just as a tiny follow-up to what Alita asked, and I confess to having read the plan only twice. And so I feel very ignorant. But is there, what does each, I'll call it community board, but each neighborhood then get to set its own rules?
Okay.
Or is there a kind of averaging out, or what?
I think the thing for me to do, this is why I wanted the staff to be ready. Let's put up Appendix C, guys, because I think this is the easiest way to describe it to everybody. Because there's, and Alita, I think it's going to answer a lot of your questions as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So Will or Max, if you could put up Appendix C, that would be very helpful.
Absolutely. So I have your files here.
Appendix
I'm not
C.
seeing.
It should say response. Appendix C. It's a PowerPoint document. I sent the file to you earlier. Yes. The link. Sorry.
All right.
So the response, Appendix C.
I see several things titled response.
Response memo, RE planning together, Appendix
It's towards
C,
the bottom, Max.
and it says legislation.
I can pull it up. Give me
Oh,
one second.
thank you, Will.
Great.
There's so many files here.
Yeah, sorry. It's the PowerPoint version, not the PDF, please.
Oh, PowerPoint, not PDF?
Yep.
Okay. Give me a second.
Thanks, Will.
Yeah. Get it.
Paul, while they're doing that, could you just explain if the council members, a lot of them have reservations about different aspects of the bill and the community boards oppose it, what happens next? What are the next steps in this whole process?
Well, okay, let me show this first and I'll get back to you on that.
You don't have to. It was just,
No, it's a good question. It's a good question. So, and I think your own council member is going to have a lot to discuss as well.
Well, we have two of them, so.
Both of them are going to have a lot, since they're both co-sponsors. So I think you're onto something there, and I'll get to that. Okay, everybody can see this, right? So
yes.
This was Appendix A. Remember, I mentioned how the document described that, you know, only white wealthy neighborhoods got things, et cetera. So that was my first appendix, which showed that that completely is untrue. The second appendix had to do with the single family discussion that I mentioned before. So again, those are things I think you understand in concept why I did that, because I just think they're completely wrong about that. Appendix C was to actually look at the legislation and describe what the outcome of that legislation. And again, the document is 22 pages long. What I did was I distilled some of the most important language within that bill for you to understand how this is set up. And again, the response from from Speaker Johnson and his people has been, nobody understands this. Mr. Graziano's misrepresenting everything, and every other person, including the allies to them, nobody understands the legislation except for him, apparently. So as someone misrepresenting it, I hope you'll take my misrepresentations with some interest. So please go to the next slide. Just go down. Yep, next one. There we go. So what you're going to see here is the blue is actually the text directly from the document. All right, this is from the bill, Intro 2186-2020. But this is sort of the basic process. So there's going to be this new director who will be appointed by and only answer to the mayor. They will submit a, quote, draft citywide goals statement. So this goals statement is going to be taken from data gathered from every community board, by community board area, as well as projections and targets, okay? And according to the legislation, a single public meeting in each borough is required. Now, their statement is, well, but that doesn't mean that that's going to be the only one. Yes, but by law, it's the only one that's required, okay? Again, I say this statement, while giving lip service to other issues and needs in the city, will focus primarily on housing. And the reason I say that is when you look through the legislation, housing and population are really the focus of 80 to 90% of the document, okay? This is furthered by, quote, determining quantitative community district level targets for each community board, which, quote, shall include, but not limited to, prioritizing population growth where applicable in areas that have high access to opportunity and low risk for displacement with limited additional input from borough presidents. Now, that definition of high access to opportunity and low risk for displacement can mean many things. One thing it can mean is it's near public transit, or it's near a major road, or it's near a highway, or it's in an area that's got good access to other things, right? Low risk for displacement is also an interesting statement. In a low density neighborhood, that could be an area, for example, that's relatively close to those things I mentioned, but has the ability to go from, let's say, a single family zone to a higher density zone, a much higher density zone. So the amount of displacement that you're doing is minimal because you're only displacing, let's say there's 12 houses on a block and you're replacing that with a zoning that could accommodate 500 units of housing, for example. It could also mean that there's low risk for displacement of low income people or people of color, et cetera. It's a pretty broad definition, okay? A final citywide goal statement, again, the start is this draft statement. A final citywide goal statement will be submitted 2.5 months later. Again, everything in this document is on a very short timeline, okay? With a single public meeting in each borough required. The final statement, quote, shall include such changes and revisions as the director of the Office of Long-Term Planning deems appropriate after reviewing the comments received on the preliminary citywide goal statement. Again, the director will have the ability to introduce changes if they wish to. This all depends on who the mayor is. It all depends on who the director is. It depends on a lot of things that we have zero control over, okay? Once this statement has passed, there will be a quantitative community district level targets that the director finds appropriate to include, followed by, again, this is where we get into the interesting stuff, 3 potential land use scenarios for accommodating the community district level targets, each of which shall include all applicable proposed future land uses, including but not limited to residential, commercial, industrial, institutions, open space, transportation, and utilities with indications for relative height and density. Now, that sounds a little more well-rounded. It sounds a little more comprehensive. Unfortunately, as we go to the next slide, you'll see it's not as comprehensive as it sounds. Next slide, please. Okay. The 3 potential land use scenarios will be submitted by community boards, borough presidents, and the newly created long-term planning steering committee, with 4 people each from the mayor and the city council and 1 from each borough president. So there would be 13 people on this new long-term planning steering committee. Mind you, this is not a redesigning of the Department of City Planning and the City Planning Commission. It is the new Department of Long-Term Planning and the new Long-Term Planning Steering Committee and the new Director of Long-Term Planning. Okay. Now this is directly from the text. Each of the 3 potential land use scenarios shall prioritize 1, areas for population growth where applicable that have high access to opportunity and low risk for displacement, and 2, any other priorities identified by the director through the public engagement process, which is at the director's discretion. Again, typically when you're looking at comprehensive planning, you're looking at everything. You're not looking at housing and everything else. You're not lumping housing into one category and everything else into the other category. You're looking at everything together. And this whole idea about infrastructure needs and budget, that this is supposedly going to tie it together, it does not tie it together. What it does is it aggregates the budget issues from every agency, which is great, which should be done already. But there is no actual connection to land use and the budget. Let me make that very clear. Nothing ties land use decisions to the budget or the needs of a community. Nothing. And that's very important to understand, because you can talk about what an area needs, but that has nothing to do with actually what's going to happen with land use. Nothing. And I brought that to the attention of various people saying, you know, it's one thing to say, well, you know, this area should go from a single family R2 zone to an R6A zone, which is a 75-foot tall apartment building zone, but only if that area gets the $150 million sewer line that they need and the 300 school seats that they're going to need with that projection and the new park that they're going to need in that area and all that other stuff. Again, none of that is tied to land use. Okay, let's keep going. Within 1 year of the initiation of the process, the director, quote, shall submit to the council, borough presidents, and community boards a draft comprehensive long-term plan. So this is within 5 months afterwards of those plans. They shall each submit one of those scenarios to the Speaker of the City Council, who shall decide which of those land use scenarios is the one that they're going to pick. Okay, within another 5 months, they will choose one of those scenarios. If the council cannot agree on one of those scenarios, then the director will choose one for them. Okay, so again, the council will choose one scenario for each of the 59 community boards. And if there's a squabble because they can't choose on one of these 3, then the director will choose it for them, along with a written reply. So now I'm going to show you some graphics so that you kind of get an idea of what I'm talking about. Go to the next one, please. So this is the area for Community Board 8. Community Board 8 is a semi-suburban area of Queens. It's Hillside Avenue on the south, which abuts downtown Jamaica, which is a very urban area. The Van Wyck Expressway and Flushing Meadows on the west, the Long Island Expressway on the north, and the Clearview Expressway and Cunningham Park on the east. A lot of it is zoned single family. A lot of it is zoned multifamily. It's a mixed district, but mostly in a relatively lower density district, relatively. Please keep going. Next slide. So here's an example of, you can go to the next one too. So here's an example of, nope, go up, sorry. Go back. Go back. Keep going back. There you go. Perfect. Right there. So let's say Community Board 8 in Queens, which is what this is, says, you know, this area at the corner of Hillside and Queens Boulevard, which is currently zoned R4-1, which allows semi-attached 1 and 2 family homes. Oh, I forgot to mention something very important. We're talking about the goals and targets from the director's report. So this is where things get really cagey, because what can happen is, let's say the target is based on projections that in the next 10 years, the city of New York is going to have an increase of population of 500,000 people. Let's just throw that number out. let's say that, you know, in 2020, we have right now we've actually gone down in population from 2010. So let's say we have 8.1 million people or 8.2 million people instead of 8.5. And in the next 10 years, the projections are that we're going to have 8.7 million people. So we're going to have an increase of 500,000 people over the next 10 years. And based on equity and based on opportunity and based on low risk of displacement, every community board is going to have to absorb X amount of people, 5,000 people, 7,000 people, 10,000 people, whatever the number is. Again, this is all theoretical. So in order to square the circle, they say, you know what, CB8, you're going to have to absorb 7,000 people in the next 10 years. So you're going to have to come up with areas that are going to have to upzone in order to meet that target. So Community Board 8 says, okay, this is our preferred area because it's near a subway station and it's near the Queens Boulevard subway station and it's near a major highway and 2 major roads, R4-1 to R7A. The borough president comes in and says, you know, this area is near the Parsons Boulevard subway station and it's an R5 zone and it should go to an R7A. And the long-term planning steering committee says, you know, this area is near the 179th Street station. It's an R3X zone, which only allows 1 and 2 family detached homes. And we think this should go to an R6A, which is a 75-foot tall apartment zone. So let's say, for argument's sake, the one that's chosen is the R3X zone. So now you can go to the next slide. Thank you. You can, yeah, okay, so there's your things, and now go to the next one. So let's zero in. So here's the R3X zone. Go to the next one, please. And this is the adjacent R6A zone, and that's what they're saying. Well, R6A is on Hillside Avenue, and in order to accommodate the new growth, the R3X zone should be in the plan as an area that's designated for future growth. So the R3X zone is not immediately rezoned to R6A. That's not what happens. What happens is it's designated in the plan as being an area for growth. So what happens is, go to the next slide, please. A developer buys up 3 houses on this half block that has 6 houses. He puts in a ULURP and says, listen, I own these 3 houses and I want it to go to R6A. So he puts in the ULURP. Again, ULURP is not removed. ULURP is gone around because what happens is the process is now streamlined. The city planning, Department of City Planning has done a GEIS for any area that was quote unquote destined for growth, for future growth. It's already been done. It goes through the process, but the city council doesn't hear it unless it's quote unquote voluntarily called up by the council. And if they do, they have to argue why it shouldn't be rezoned to R6A, because the reason it's being rezoned to R6A is because it aligns with this new plan. Okay, so again, the R3X isn't automatically rezoned to R6A. It's just designated an area for future growth so that developers can come in and upzone these areas through ULURP through a streamlined process where the council member essentially will not have member deference to say, hey, we rezoned this area to R3X to stop overdevelopment in our area, and now you want to reverse that to R6A. Well, that now I can't do anything about it unless I can argue why you can't, you know, this is impossible to do. So if you go to the next slide, what happens is that spot goes from R3X to R6A. Done. And this is what's going to repeat over and over again. Now, if the developer says, you know what, I don't want to go to an R6A, I want to go to an R7A or an R8A, then the ULURP process will kick back in. But if something is designated that's in quote unquote alignment with the new plan, then there's really very little way to stop it once it's been adopted under this comprehensive plan. So just imagine the fight that you had in your community board to get your R8B mid-blocks, and the director comes in and says, Community Board 8 on the Upper East Side is going to have to absorb X number of units in your area, And so you're going to have to upzone a certain area in order to absorb those units. And you're going to have to come up, and one of those three scenarios is going to get adopted. And then once that happens, it's over. And those areas are going to be upzoned piecemeal, spot zoning, where there's no way to really stop it. And that's really what this is all about. And if you don't believe me, you can hear the speaker's own statement, and I will just read it to you because I think it's important for people to understand. This is from his own press release. The final adopted long-term plan would then serve as the foundation for both public and private development decisions. Future land use applications that are consistent with the comprehensive plan would only be subject to a council vote if the council voluntarily calls up the application, thereby incentivizing land use actions that further the implementation of the plan while maintaining mechanisms for review. That, again, they're not changing ULURP, they're going around ULURP. A mandate that the city complete a generic environmental impact statement, GEIS, for the long-term plan will both further incentivize development consistent with the plan by reducing project costs. So again, this is about reducing project costs for developers, not benefiting the community. The next line I find laughable. This is reducing project costs which can be redirected into community benefits. I don't see developers redirecting private money into community benefits for something that they've already got streamlined approvals for. While ensuring, this is back to the text, while ensuring the city evaluates the impacts of the comprehensive plan's planning and zoning policies, future development that is deemed consistent with the plan would then only be required to complete supplemental environmental review on the impacts specific to that project. And I want to add in one more thing. The argument that they're saying is this doesn't stop neighborhoods from downzoning their neighborhood. The problem is that there is no incentive in the opposite direction, right? A developer has an incentive to put in a ULURP to upzone their property from R3X to R6A, but they don't have an incentive to downzone it from R6A to R3X, if that were even possible. The only people who are going to be doing that are the city, based on the community wanting a downzoning plan, which, as we know, under this administration has not happened in 7 years. It happened under the previous administration because that was part of their policy. So if it can happen under the current system, why do you need to create a brand new framework and structure to push this when it doesn't work in the reverse? So again, I hope that that is a fair explanation of the legislation.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
would move on to the next question if there are.
Yes. And I think Sherry is next.
Okay.
There she is.
Go ahead, Sherry.
Hi. When I found out that the city of New York had no overall planning, I frankly was flabbergasted. I mean, as we know, every other major city, not only in the country, but in the world, has a plan, but New York doesn't. I also wanted to agree with Paul on this. As of right, we've had applications before the zoning committee that everybody was opposed to, and the developer, flipped his nose and said, but it's as of right. So that certainly needs to be addressed. But my question to you is, how does the members of a community board come up with these three scenarios? We're volunteering.
One scenario. You come up with one scenario, the borough president comes up with one scenario, and the long-term planning steering committee comes up with one scenario. Your three scenarios collectively then go to the council and they choose one of them.
All right, so let's do the one scenario.
Yes.
We're volunteers. Some of us have been on the zoning committee and been involved. Many of us aren't. So how are we expected as lay people to come up with a scenario? How do we do that?
Well, how long have the community boards been requesting money for an independent planner per board?
Yes.
For decades. they've been asking for this. And as someone who has managed to do that for a number of boards because they set up nonprofits that they could take money before the big scandal that they cut that off about 10 years ago. But I did that for a number of community boards as an independent person. But this is, the problem is, if you don't have dedicated resources for a professional planner that is not connected to the city, that has to be your choice of planner, not their choice of planner or someone from DCP dictating to you. How on God's green earth are, like you said, there are planners and architects on boards. Case in point, Anthony is an architect, and there's other architects on this committee as well. But to not have a neutral party or a party that's interested in the welfare of the community board on staff makes it impossible for this mandate to occur. Impossible.
And there are not that many neutral planners available for all the community boards to.
There are so few planners like me or George Janes, for example. There are very few of us out there. Most of us work for governments, or we work for nonprofits, or we work for developers.
We work with developers, right? You're taking one side or the other.
Correct.
So it leaves the community board with very little resources to use to help us develop our own scenarios. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry.
And I'm not against comprehensive planning is good. This is not comprehensive planning.
Elaine.
Oi. What can I say? There is what I call an academic planning together piece that's put out by Corey Johnson. And then there's the legislation. I'm sorry, I really want to back up and forget what I said, because I'd like to put a motion on the floor to reject the plan and then speak to it. I apologize. I mean, I'm for suits with what's going on. In reviewing both, it eliminates community involvement. It's a top-down process where everything is situated in the mayor's office. I don't know if Corey Johnson was doing this because he thought he was going to run, or he was running for mayor, thought he would win, but then has withdrawn. That's an aside. But when I look at what is being talked about, and Paul and Sharon, you identified many of the issues. The issue is there is no involvement for the community board. They are putting together legislation, and don't say, well, you don't need to worry about money. If I look at this from a strategic plan, what are the strengths? I haven't found them. The limitations, absolutely. Eliminates community involvement, centralizes everything into the minute. What are the opportunities? Only if the communities have the resources to commandeer what's going on, there are no opportunities. Limitations are, we have no community involvement. You have a new director of, what do we call it? Strategic planning or whatever.
Long-term.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Long-term
Planning
and sustainability. That person has all the power within them, not accountable to any of the communities. You have these advisory boards that are set up with the power from the mayor and the speaker of council, with the borough presidents only having one rep on these committees. I would suggest we need to reallocate those numbers. We see what happens with the Board of Education. It's not a good model. We lose any type of input on what our needs are. I'm going to say that in reading the report, I question who has written this. They have now put the whole context of change into quote unquote COVID, and are really inferring that what we have done from a city point of view on planning is racist. That was upsetting. We live in a community that has a high percentage of white people. They are inferring we have power to make change and get what we want. Let me tell you, having been co-chair of planning for years, we cannot get anything done from an R8B put in 12 years ago to change it to trying to do 210. We get no support on any kind of zoning change we want. They infer that we don't have affordable housing. As a community board, we have fought this for years. And between the developers and the legislators, they've allocated affordable housing that belonged in our neighborhood to different boroughs because, quote unquote, cheaper to build, and we're placating to the developers. It's not acceptable. It is our time to say we want the power from a community level to do the planning, work with the processes, and open up and re-examine what the developers are doing with ULUP and everything else. It was very upsetting to read through, and I'm not going to go line by line, because the more I read, I mean, we have lost any role because it's a top-down process. You heard Paul said 3 plans are put in. Ultimately, that director of that office makes the decision. Who is that person? I looked at the advisory board that would work with this unit, new unit. Well, what are the term limits? It doesn't say anything, but it says if somebody leaves, then, you know, they reappoint. But they have criteria for whom should be on the board. But it doesn't say we need one from box X and one from box Y. It is a very broad legislative, and the legislation is really the key, not the philosophical, and I am a planner and I've taught this stuff, nonsense, I'm sorry, about what should be. It has nothing to relate to what is reality. Also, there's no budget figure on this. What would it cost to do this? We as a city have lost many funding sources. Where's the money coming from? What's the staffing that's going to occur? And on a local community board, when are we going to have a staff person that can do the work for us? We're all volunteers. None of this is in the legislation. There's no allocation of funding. There's nothing. I mean, I could give you my notes. You really don't want to see them. But I'm really concerned that we're being sold a bill of goods with no reality. And so I reinforce what my motion is. But if we want to be a community-based planning approach, it belongs to us in the neighborhood, not to somebody who can look broadly around the city and make decisions, for whom we have no idea who this person is, how long they'll be there, what their qualifications are, and what is the process to remove. It sounds to me a little like landmarks or BSA. I stopped there, but I'm really upset about what this does to community planning, because this is not community planning. It definitely was not comprehensive planning. The one thing we asked in our neighborhood, a developer comes in, guess what? Where's the infrastructure? Where's the plumbing? Where's the schools? We get nothing. And they're saying in here we could negotiate? How? It's out of our hands. It's between the mayor and the developer. Thank you.
I would just, Elaine, sorry, before you go on, I would just ask you to amend your motion to reject planning together and intro 2186 2020.
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to do both. Thank you very much. I accept that. You're not on the board. You can't say that.
I know, but I had to say something.
Thank you.
Okay.
Could you do what?
Now, how do we do this?
I don't know.
Elizabeth, do we ask for a second and then continue the conversation? I see hands up from Sherry, and Rita had her hand up, and Michelle, of course, nodding. Is that? Let's do that. Okay. All right. Elizabeth Rose has had her hand up for a while, and
Sure.
I have
Go ahead.
no idea where she is. Found her?
Thank
Okay.
you so
Yeah, I
much,
just found
Anthony. Thank you. So I will start by saying I agree that I oppose this legislation. And now let me go into the aspects of it that I have some empathy for. The city needs to build 25,000 units of housing every year for a decade to catch up with demand. And there is no reason to believe that under our current systems that we will achieve anything close to that. And certainly not of the cost levels that we need. A second, I was driving through the Bronx a couple of days ago, and it made me really angry because there were blocks upon blocks of single family attached housing. Maybe they were two family, but they were very low scale. And I thought, why aren't there at least, 5-story, 7-story apartment buildings throughout this area? I genuinely believe there is no part of the city that should be zoned for single family housing, period. We are an urban environment. And while some people may be able to afford to keep single family homes, there shouldn't be areas of the city that are zoned for only single family homes. Those kinds of issues are never going to be addressed by local community planning. Those are the kinds of decisions that I genuinely believe does need some sort of a comprehensive view that says, just that. We are an urban environment that requires significantly greater housing than the current market provides, and we need to do something pretty dramatic in order to increase the number of units that are built. And I want to be very specific about the number of units because in our current environment, number of units is not a component of what can be built as of right. There is nothing about our current zoning that says if the space is this amount of space or this number of square feet that are allowed, that must be at least X number of units. It could be one unit. You could build a skyscraper that is a single unit under our current zoning. So the last point that I wanted to make is the other real problem with our current process, I believe, is that any developer can propose an upzoning of a very small area. And I genuinely believe that any proposals for not building as of right need to be extremely broad and large scale and involve multiple blocks or larger areas than small areas, because otherwise, you're basically pitting every individual developer of any individual site against, how fair is it to expect, local community residents to be able to put up a battle. So my question is, if we don't have some sort greater top-down goal setting or greater top-down zone development, how do we get there? How do we get to building at least 25,000 units of housing at more modest price levels every year? How do we get to upzoning huge swaths of New York City to make that 25,000 unit goal possible. How do we get to eliminating the lot by lot ULURP battles that never favor the local community?
Well, the first thing I'll say, if I can respond, is, well, first of all, coming from a low density neighborhood, and as I said, someone who made the point that the city, only a very small portion of the city is actually zoned single family, I respectfully disagree with you. But beyond that, what was occurring under the previous administration was large scale neighborhood by neighborhood rezonings. And these large scale neighborhood rezonings were taking into account a lot of what you're talking about. These are areas where the character is X. These are areas where the character is Y. These are areas that should be promoted for growth. And again, even your own area of the Upper East Side, that was done as a massive rezoning covering the whole Upper East Side, which is why your mid blocks have been relatively preserved. So I think the key here is that it's kind of a false argument, not your argument, but the argument that's being made that that this has never been done before and it can't be done. And no, it was being done. It was being done. Again, did I agree with everything that the Bloomberg administration did? No, but they were doing it in a way that had never been done in the 50 years that the zoning resolution had been done, with community input, with deep planning, and reasonable outcomes that the buy-in on every level was very high. If this had continued under this current administration, we would probably not be in quite the hole that we're in. Now, in terms of your numbers, I would respectfully disagree with your numbers as well. We have a situation, really what we have, and I think you kind of touched on it. We have an issue of, we don't have a housing supply issue. We have a housing supply issue for segments of the population. So what we have is, we actually have, as I said, our population has decreased, and that was before COVID. Who the heck knows what the population of the city is right now? Because we don't know. But prior to that, up until 2020, we lost close to 400,000 people in the city between 2010 and 2020. And that's, again, before the census and before COVID. So we really have an issue with supply for those who need it versus actual housing supply. And, you know, one of the things that came up, and it's a big argument going on right now, is this whole idea to repurpose commercial buildings in Midtown and other parts of the city to create housing out of it, which, again, there's a lot of problems with that, because that takes local control away, specifically away from the community boards and the local planning process. So the issue here, again, is how do you create actual community planning and community-based planning, whatever that community is, whether it's the Upper East Side or Flushing or the South Bronx or Staten Island. How do you do this? And again, you're coming up with these numbers, which are projections, and those projections aren't necessarily correct.
So Paul, just to jump in there, I will tell you where my numbers came from. My numbers came from, in my last few months in the de Blasio administration, I was part of a team across every city agency that was led by the Department of City Planning to discuss city needs. And those were numbers that were then put forth. And so this is now 2018 by the Department of City Planning of what they believed the need was.
That's exactly my point, is that the population has dropped over 100,000 people since 2018.
Right, but
COVID. And they weren't projecting that. They were projecting an increase.
Of course not. A chunk of it is COVID.
No. This is before COVID. This is before COVID. What I'm trying to say.
But the reason that the population has been dropping, or one of the major reasons that the population has been dropping, is the affordability of housing. It is one of the things that we saw over and over and over again at the Department of Education was families moving out of the city because they could no longer afford to live there. And so they were moving to the South, they were moving to Pennsylvania, they were moving to wherever relatives lived. But the reason that we kept seeing at the DOE population dropping, and yes, we saw people going to charter schools, but the aggregate population drop that we saw was primarily driven by we cannot afford to live here because there is no housing. So I very much agree with your statement that we have a housing problem based on affordability for certain segments of the population.
But no, that's exactly what you just said, that we have a housing problem based on the supply of affordable housing. And I think Paul was saying the same thing.
Exactly.
Now, I think we should also just go ahead and move on to Michelle. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. A couple of things. First of all, just to address this immediate point about the population going down, I would suggest that a good percentage of people leaving New York are the more affluent, not necessarily people looking elsewhere for affordable housing, but rather quality of life issues like schools and just crime and what's happening on the streets is motivating a good segment of the population to leave. And the very wealthy are leaving because they are moving to no income tax states. So there's that whole segment of the population leaving. And of course, when they do, they take their tax base. They are the tax base, so they're leaving with it, which leaves less in the city coffers. So it's a roundabout problem. But to getting back to the point of this particular proposal, of which I am in opposition, and I listened to all 7 hours of that testimony, every single word of it. I thought the City Planning Commission chair was very impressive in her remarks. But let me say this, when we're talking about city planning, the commission is implying that as a result of this, there will be an overall planning of the entire city, the 5 boroughs. The implication here is that they will consider everything about how and what makes a productive and equitable city function, and they're going to try to arrange it in that way. So there'll be, that they'll have to deal with zoning for schools and factories and housing and affordable. I mean, the implication is it's an overriding plan. However, it isn't an overriding plan, especially if they are claiming, and not that I would want it to be, because to me, it would be all in whose vision that overriding plan is going to take place. I'm not so sure that I would agree with the vision of many people who possibly could be the in control, let's say. However, if they're claiming that they will accept a plan from each community board, then each community board is not taking into consideration the needs of the next community board. So by virtue of that, each community board is submitting a plan for the needs as they see it in their community and what would be the greatest benefit to their community. That in no way helps, benefits, refers, or in any way comments on what the next community board will do. So they are creating this overall panel, and yet they are claiming that even though they're going to have this big overall panel, there are going to be 3 entities that will be permitted to submit plans. One of those will be the community board. The community board will be, in theory, the only entity that will only be taking into consideration their community. That logic tells me that the community board will be the least likely to be chosen for their plan. If the makers of this plan claim that that's not true, then what do you need the other 2/3 as entities anyway? You've already got the community board. If you're claiming that you'd like to give them a city plan, and that was somewhere in this bill, that each community board gets a city planner or two, if you're claiming that you're willing to do that, well, then do that. And then put it into the hands of the community board, which is a power structure that is already in place. Let me also say that I don't see that a program like this, overall city planning, as with any institution, I don't think any institution can solve all of the, in quote, challenges of living in a city, of a population, city or elsewhere. You can't foist on the schools all of the housing and meal inequity, psychological problems. You can't take one institution and make it the arbiter to solve every single social challenge that we have. That goes to multiple entities. And the attempt here is to say that they're going to try to do this with an overall city plan. However, they're also claiming that they're not going to take that overall city plan out of the hands of individual community boards. That being the case, the individual community board is not looking at a 5-borough multi-community board plan. So to me, the whole thing is contradictory. As far as people who have made a stake in the neighborhood, who've made an investment in the neighborhood, time, money, tradition, family, work, schools, whatever, if they have decided to go into a community that is zoned for single family housing, even though it's only 15%, they should be entitled to have them. They've made an investment in that community, and nobody should arbitrarily come in and disrupt them. And that's true when you're talking about zoning on many levels. People buy into it on a certain premise, and you can't necessarily come in and pull the rug out for them. This is not to say that zoning can never, ever be changed, but it should not be changed arbitrarily for some overriding, in quotes, social good by an overriding board that claims to be the arbiter of all that affects every city of a population of 8.1 million people. So to me, this is flawed from the get-go, and I will vehemently oppose it. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. And let's hear from Craig. Again, we're already bumping up against 8 o'clock, so let's try and be brief. Okay, Craig, please.
Thank you, Anthony. I'll be quite brief, I think. I can't support a resolution tonight, and I'd like to briefly comment as to why and provide some thoughts on the process as well. So while I respect the need for the Zoning and Development Committee to introduce this topic and to have a discussion, to have an out-of-district consultant with a strong opinion on the topic essentially present his interpretation of the bill before we have a chance for public officials to do so, I think that's entirely inappropriate. If I were to do this with a comparable issue on the Transportation Committee, I'd surely be criticized for attempting to bias the discussion, and rightly so. This isn't meant to disrespect Mr. Graziano. As an urban planner myself, I obviously recognize his qualifications to comment, and I'm not looking to question the veracity of his viewpoint, even if I don't agree with it entirely. However, that's not my argument. And this isn't to suggest that I don't have serious issues with the proposal and the weakening of the role of the community boards that's within it. I absolutely do. But that isn't to say that there aren't necessary discussions that need to be held regarding the plan and what it aims to achieve, which includes laudable goals, especially regarding equity and addressing the manner in which New York City has developed largely due to exclusionary planning approaches, whether explicit or unintentional. And I think it's an important discussion we should be having, but we are setting ourselves up to push such issues aside by jumping straight to opposition and avoiding any such difficult and necessary discussions. So I look forward to commenting on such issues next week after the appropriate official presentation is provided at the land use meeting. And I look forward, hopefully, to this committee providing equal time for someone in favor of this proposal to present it in a similar manner to what we had tonight. So I have the ability, and others have the ability, to make a judgment based on competing arguments instead of it being a one-sided discussion that's used to frame the topic. Thank you.
Okay, Craig, just very quickly, because the plan is going to be endorsed by the speaker next week, we felt it was appropriate to give all of us an opportunity to look more skeptically at it before it was presented in its best light. Now, the only problem with the problem with waiting, with this committee waiting to make some sort of comment or decision, is that as all of us know, the land use committee meetings are in fact the last possible point at which you can have a serious discussion for or against. It's fine if we don't pass a resolution this evening, but I think it was important that we present skeptical views of this proposal tonight, because we're going to get the opposite viewpoint on Wednesday.
No, and I hear you, but I think at the same time we should have had the counterpoints as well, just to be able to provide an even-handed discussion, so people really have a chance to think about it in a more sophisticated manner than just hearing why this is why this should be opposed, and to think of it skeptically, because I think it warrants such a discussion. And I'm afraid of us poisoning the well essentially by having this discussion and coming out with a strong resolution that will obviously be read by people and will help to frame that discussion again in the same way, where people who really don't have much knowledge of zoning and planning issues will see that, and then there are many people who will be prone to possibly just using that as the building blocks for why they would support or oppose a board resolution. So again, I just felt like I wanted to state that, and I don't want to have an extended discussion here tonight about that. That wasn't my goal. I just wanted to explain why I can't.
I'd like to point out that the committee has been sent the speaker's proposal, both the law and his report on it. So that side has been sent to the members of the committee or in the last several weeks. So they do have that side.
And let's see, I'm going to, let's continue with board members, and then we'll come back to non-board members. Rita, you're up next.
While you're unmuting, Rita, I just want to give one programming update that happened recently. George Janes is also going to present next week at the Land Use Committee.
Oh, okay.
In opposition to this proposal. So it isn't just going to be a one-sided conversation at the Land Use Committee. I just wanted to update everybody because that is actually new information.
Hi, I want you to know I support the resolution that Elaine put forth, and I understand what Elizabeth Rose said, and it brought home a lot of things to me when she said she's driving through the Bronx. I have two things here that ran in the Daily News in May. 1, 2, you're going to have to trust me that I'm telling you the truth. For the building, one is in East New York and one is on Roosevelt Island. In East New York, at the 40% AMI level, there are 22 apartments, and the top level is 100%, and there are 94 units. Let's go to Roosevelt Island. Roosevelt Island, at the 40% AMI level, even with Brooklyn, there are only 11 apartments. And the top is 165% AMI which is 148 apartments. I don't know if I could prove it, except in my heart, I believe that the plan that was brought before us is a plan for ethnic cleansing. And that when you build out of New York City, I don't see anybody coming up to the empty blocks that we have right in Community Board 8 and think of putting in affordable housing. Not one. And not only that, I consider myself fairly smart. I wouldn't deem to explain this, but I also think that the people sitting next to me also don't know it. More than that, I don't think that my city council, whom I think knows a lot, I don't think he knows it. And not only that, I don't think that the mayor knows it, because this is really technical. And those are the people who are going to make a decision. It would be like going to a biology class and say, okay, we're now going to have brain surgery on a real life person. I am appalled by this. I feel belittled by it. I'm angry. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Let's go to Peter Patch, who has not had an opportunity to speak, and then if, well, we'll see. Okay, Peter.
Briefly, I always respect what Craig has to say. Having said that, I would make 2 points. First of all, I feel like for the reasons presented and also for some other reasons that I have in terms of understanding what is and isn't in the community interest, I feel like I have enough enough information to make a decision at this point. And I also believe that if I got more information and different information that actually led me to change my view, I could do that at the land use meeting. I'm very clearly opposed.
Thank you, Peter. I think that's actually a very sensible approach. Okay, Michelle, do you promise to be quick so that we can get, all right, she's nodding.
I do. I just wanted to second the fact that we have a lot of information. You know, you can always do research, and more research. A lot of documentation was given to us. Many of us sat in on that hearing. We had the proposal ahead of time. I had the full legislation. As a matter of fact, I sent it to the committee, the actual legislation. Yes, we have had a long time to consider this. If you want additional information, you have an opportunity to get it next week. And as Peter said, there's no reason we can't have a vote tonight. If you want to change your mind, you have an opportunity next week when it's the meeting of the whole board who has to approve whatever we say tonight. So we should not hold this up, because in this instance, time is of the essence. So I don't want to be, sidelined here. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, we've got Alita, Elaine. Oh, now Rita raised her hand again too. Okay, Alita, please.
Thanks. I'll be really brief. This reminds me of the Alan Dershowitz line that someone who kills his parents and then asks the court for mercy as an orphan, it's chutzpah. Here we have the administration for decades and decades and decades has forced us into the position of not enough affordable housing in the city, and now has asked for even more of a chance to deprive communities of input. And there's something really, really wrong with it. Also, someone on the board texted me a question for Paul, which is, what would real comprehensive city planning look like? What would a real plan look like?
Okay, let's, if we could unmute Paul to answer that direct question, that would be great.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you, Alita.
So, thank you. I mean, again, there are great examples of real comprehensive planning. I think one of the key, I kind of gave this argument before. Let's say, well, first of all, when you do comprehensive planning, you're giving every aspect the same emphasis, right? So it's not, again, this quote unquote plan really focuses on housing and everything else. They literally have two categories. One category is housing and population, and quote, everything else that the director might want to throw in there into the kitchen sink. So when you're looking at comprehensive planning, you're looking at everything and you're giving equal weight to it, right? And you're tying dollars, budget, and legal aspects to enforce that plan. I wrote a plan for the town of Boonton, New Jersey. I was the co-author in 1998. Award-winning plan, very exciting. But what's really cool about it is once that plan is put into effect, it becomes law. This is the way the state of New Jersey works. So that plan, everything we put in there for parks, open space, transportation, Main Street revitalization, zoning changes, you name it, becomes law. And every 7 years, according to law, they have to re-examine the plan. So they're in their third re-exam since I did it in 1998. So my point is that that's comprehensive planning, tying budget. And I was saying this before, you want to upzone my block? Well, you need to put in that $100 million sewer line, and you need to have those school seats allocated and paid for. You have to have that new annex built. You have to have that new open space already done. None of that is in here. None of it. That's real planning.
I think.
Thank you, Paul.
Could I just ask one follow-up? I think Seattle does that and
Yes.
demands things of its developers in order to build in highly desirable neighborhoods. Are there plans where communities, like community boards, have had much more input into the process
Yes.
than what they're demanding here? And also, is there any role in this plan? I know there's a bucket for housing and a bucket for everything but housing. What about landmarks and the kinds of intangibles that build a vibrant city?
Historic preservation is not even mentioned in the plan. It doesn't exist, which is, you know, as someone who's a land use person and also a qualified historic preservation consultant, I've put thousands of buildings on the National Register in the last 20 years. It's pretty offensive that historic preservation would not even be considered. So yes, this is, I keep coming back to this is not comprehensive planning. I'll give you a great example. You mentioned Seattle. Again, they don't have as of right. So what happens is even when they have the comprehensive plan, every new development has to be negotiated by the public and the planning board. And yes, there are many examples where neighborhood councils have rezoned their areas. And in fact, Wallingford, which is one of the areas, it's famous for the gnome of, or the goblin, the gnome of Seattle, which is the sculpture. They were getting hit with tremendous development issues, and they downzoned to single family because the neighborhood said, hey, we're not appropriate for the kind of development that's going on here. So they were able to initiate and negotiate that compromise. They have a lot more power because they're see, again, we have a certain structure in the city. I don't see the city giving up as of right development, and I don't see the city creating powerful neighborhood councils. I don't see the city charter changing that way. All this does is remove what little power you already have.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thanks, Alita. That was actually a good question. Let's see, we've got Elaine again briefly, Marco briefly, and Gail, who has not spoken yet. So Gail could, let's maybe do.
I will defer to Gail.
Okay.
And to Gail.
All right. Gail.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Anthony and Elizabeth for inviting Paul, because this is obviously a very complex subject, and being able to have this type of discussion really shows why you need to have a zoning and development committee and have these issues on the floor prior to land use. Secondly, I ran the Long Island City Partnership for 15 years. And I certainly know Paul's reputation. One thing I can say about him throughout Queens and the borough president's office at that point, Helen Marshall, Paul was always known as being very objective. So I can say, I think with openness, that I'm certain that whatever he is presenting to us tonight has validity. And I think we've had a very good discussion. And for that reason, I'd like to call the question.
Could we just, Elaine is seconding that, I see, but Could we just, since Andrew Ravishare has had his hand up for what seems to be hours, metaphorically anyway, maybe we should let him speak since he is also the only member of the public who's raised his hand.
Sure, go ahead, Andrew. I just unmuted you.
Hi, thank you very much. And I appreciate everyone's comments. And Rita, I feel your anger. And here are just some numbers that I would like to keep in mind. According to Bloomberg, this came out on December 5th, 2020. Even before COVID-19, 2,600 people a week were leaving New York City. So the idea that the affordable housing that we don't have is due to a lack of supply is just simply not true. That's a false, flawed premise. What is true, and we see it all the time in our neighborhood, and my friends in Inwood see it, and in Brooklyn, and even in Staten Island, is that the few rent stabilized or affordable units that we have are being knocked down by luxury developers who then build in a race to the sky for increased profits. They include quote unquote affordable housing, which is not actually affordable and is more expensive than those rent stabilized units. Even before the pandemic, those buildings were 25% to 50% empty. Now they're even more empty as those people are going to the Hamptons because they can't go to Broadway or their fancy restaurants. And meanwhile, over the past decade, Community Board 8 has lost 14,438 rent stabilized units, and Manhattan has lost 23,552 overall. What we need to do is, instead of just simply building taller because we think that's going to increase affordable housing, which as we've seen is not the case, we need to have construction crews rehab the existing infrastructure that we have. And if Midtown buildings are truly not going to be office space anymore, we already have the height there to convert those units. But the idea that we are going to give up any remaining control that is already limited that we have in the name of affordable housing, which by the way, never comes, is ludicrous and angry making. And I'd like to point out that this proposal is from Corey Johnson, who is probably running for controller. And even though he claims to be against real estate, 12.4% of his 2017 contributions came from real estate. So we should all keep that in mind as we're hearing these proposals and see why our public officials are proposing what they are. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. So the question has been called. Is there any objection to that? Wonderful. All right. So how are we going to do this? So the motion on the floor is in fact that the planning proposal and the bill associated with it, I've already forgotten the number, be withdrawn. And this is the sense of this committee, that we are in opposition to it and that it should be withdrawn. Does that feel right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if everyone, so it's a yes is a no. If you could sort of lower Marco's hand for a moment, and then all the hands that anyone who is opposed or not voting for cause or abstaining, if they would then raise their hands. All right, well, we'll start. Craig?
I'm abstaining.
Okay. And we have Barry?
I abstain.
Okay. Billy?
I'm not sure whether it's abstaining or not voting for cause, but I only caught some of this meeting, so I don't think it's appropriate for me to vote tonight.
Okay. That feels like a not voting for cause. And then
getting into this meeting.
Couldn't give it just a few more seconds, moments. That's it. Okay. So the motion to request/demand withdrawal of the bill has passed, and we can move on.
We just have to read the names of everyone in attendance.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry.
Yes. Oh, sure. Yeah, no, sorry. So I'm just going to go through everyone that's here. We have Billy, Barry, Craig, Marco, Elaine, Gail, Olita, Rita, Michelle, Peter, Elizabeth, Shari, Elizabeth, Barbara, Anthony, Adam, Valerie, and give me one more moment. Make sure. And Sandrea, and that is it. Please let me know if I missed anyone. I think that's it. Okay.
Okay, good. All right, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And then we're not done. Elizabeth?
Yeah.
I think the next agenda item.
Okay. The next agenda item is just an update on the governor's bad idea, and he stuck it into the budget bill, and we have written a letter asking them to withdraw it, and I think committee members know it, but I think, and it was sent to everybody and his brother in the New York, and it ended up, we described what we objected to about it, and we strongly urge you to remove the undemocratic and community-defying proposal from the budget bill. And that's where that one is. And, oh, and the height limits are two proposals for zoning special districts that create a 210-foot height limit, save the tenements, and protect our local retail. We're having a terrible time sorting out. We have the money, but we don't seem able to get it. And I think somebody wants to speak on this issue.
Oops.
A member of the public has requested
Barbara.
to speak.
Well, actually, Barbara has her hand up.
Go ahead, Barbara.
I think you have to unmute yourself.
We put money in the budget for this, so I don't understand where the money is. Maybe Will could answer. Did he put the paperwork through? Because this shouldn't be that complicated. We've done it before. There's money in the budget specifically for a consultant for the 210. And it's my understanding he hasn't been paid. I don't understand that at all. Can Will answer that?
Actually, so you guys may have noticed that Will was kind of cutting in and out before. I'm able to message him, but he's having some minor computer difficulties. So I can try to answer questions. I may not have an answer to that, but I am here.
Okay, so I think
that's a real issue. The money is there, and there shouldn't be complicated. There's money in the budget specifically for the consultant for the 210, and I've been told that he shouldn't have to work without being paid.
So I unfortunately am not able to answer that because I'm just not on that. So, but I'm sure we'll either rejoin later or if not, perhaps tomorrow.
Okay, it shouldn't be complicated.
No, it shouldn't. All right. The next topic, and I think if we could do a screen share, because I want to just do a quick, this is the blood center, and I just want to very quickly review what the situation is. Right now, the blood center is, the blood center project is in its draft EIS state. They are working on their environmental impact statement based on the scoping meetings that were held, a scoping meeting that was held in December with commentary by Alita, among others, by the end at the end of December, by the end of December. And they're still supposedly working hard at that. And, okay. So the question is, if I could get control of the screen, I could do very quick. If not, I can just sort of.
Sure, yeah. Just give me 1 second and I can do
that. Okay.
You should be good.
Oh, so I am. Now, of course, I have to find it. Sorry, that's not it. Hang on 1 second. Where'd I hide it? Okay, I can do this. 5 minutes. All right, now I have to bring this back, I think. Nope, not that one. Sorry, I'm really bad at this. Oh, okay.
You're not bad, I'm worse.
Well, I guess. Okay. Now let me try again. There it is. Okay. All right. This is a very quick summary recap on the blood center proposal. Most of you have seen much of this. As I said, the applicants are in the environmental impact stage. They expect to have a finished draft environmental impact stage, at which point it will be delivered to us at the land use committee in, I think, May or June seems to be the schedule. Just as a reminder, this committee passed a resolution in opposition on December 8th, and the full board also passed that resolution on December 16th. So just very quickly, that's the blood center there on the, oh, there we go. Okay, here. All of you know the site. It's the building there on the left. This is from the 1939 tax photos. There's the view of the building site actually from 1927. The current building was built in 1930 as the New York Trade School, which originally had actually been around the corner across from St. Catherine's Park, across First Avenue. At that time, the building was used for plumbing, auto mechanics, wallpaper hanging. It had nice, generous ceilings. It's sort of cool that there were classes in wallpaper hanging, actually. Basically, the New York Blood Center, with its commercial partner Longfellow Real Estate Partners, proposes a major expansion at their current site. The proposed building will be 344 feet tall. The existing building is 67 feet tall, and will have a tower footprint for that full height of about 185 feet square. Casting shadows, of course, on Julia Richmond and also on St. Catherine's Park. The key numbers are that the existing building has 131,000 square feet, zoning square feet, 160,000 gross square feet, and the new building will have 562,000 gross square feet, about 4 times the size, divided between Blood Center, which is a community facility, and a commercial set of commercial laboratories. And they plan on being able to do this. This is what they say it's going to look like. And it's important to note the reflective surface of this 185-foot square tower. The reason they're going to be able to do this is that they're asking for a zoning change, if they're able to do this. And the zoning change expands the uses allowed to include medical laboratories for research in this case. And we can skip the part about the artificial teeth, dentures, or plates, but this building is supposed to not involve any danger of smoke or other particulate matter, odorous matter, glare, or other objectionable effects. Now, they want to expand the bulk regulations to allow a floor area ratio of 10, which would mean going from 5.6 to 10, and would yield a zoning square footage of almost 500,000 square feet on a very delicate site. Oh, damn it, something didn't print. All right, doesn't matter. The current zoning is represented, unfortunately missing on the left, but on the right, you have St. Catherine's Park and the subject site, which is the C27, the C27 zone. So the idea is to upzone that. At the same time, they're taking an area, the area at First Avenue, and converting that to C28, which is the same as the zoning on Second Avenue going south, but changes it from the zoning on Second Avenue going north. And the reason for that has been unclear from the beginning, although it now allows a lot of new uses. The proposed zoning text amendment. So the idea is that first they're asking for a change in zone, then they're asking to change the a change to the text amendment, which the zoning text, to allow for expanded commercial floor area. Current new zoning allows for a commercial FAR of 2, or about 90,000 square feet. And I think that shows up in the next slide, yes. And they would be allowed to increase that to about 270,000 zoning square feet of commercial labs. The zoning text amendment allows for special permits. The first is to allow commercial floor area. The second is to allow commercial floor area above the second floor. The third allows modifications to height and setback regulations. We'll show you that. And the fourth allows modifications to the rear yard equivalent. And the fifth allows modifications to the signage limits. Oh, heck. All right. Basically, what this should show, but doesn't, is that you have the blood center spaces, which are in green, and the red represents the commercial spaces. There are 9 floors of commercial space proposed here. Well, here it is a little better. This is on the left is the building they would be allowed to build as of right. On the right, at exactly the same scale, is the building that they want to build. The diagonal lines here represent the sky exposure plane, which they are asking relief from. There is a space between the two buildings, which is called the rear yard equivalent, that allows light into the interior of the block, and they are also asking for relief from that. And finally, they are asking to have great big signs that wouldn't be allowed otherwise. This is the applicant's view of the building from the northeast, with its highly reflective surface, looking across St. Catherine's Park toward, it's First Avenue in the foreground. And I'm sure you've all seen these before. This is the existing building in green, that as of right building that was shown in the in the section a couple of slides ago. And finally, the proposed building, which looms over St. Catherine's Park, and in fact is really almost as tall as the Solo building across Second Avenue. And once again, the three buildings. I think the major point from a zoning standpoint, aside from all of the other things that might be objectionable about the building, is that they're asking for a zoning change. they're asking for a text amendment to allow special permit variances, and then 5 special permits because the zoning of even a C27 zone cannot satisfy their demands for this building. And I think that as much as anything else, as much as anything, is a kind of indictment of this project. And I know that we had some people, I'm going to stop sharing. I know we had some people who wanted to speak, and I think, well, let's see, do we, well, let's have the public. Marty Bell, I think, is the first here. And so let's have Marty speak first.
Thank you, Anthony, for that summary. I thought that was excellent. But one thing I think for anyone who hasn't heard it before that is critical is that the building that you showed as of right, in their filings, the Blood Center says their operations would not change one bit. Not their operations, nothing would not change if they use that building versus what the space they would get in the commercial tower. In fact, that of right building is larger than the square footage that they're going to occupy in the of right building. You, Anthony, reviewed all the written proposals. I went back and looked at the initial presentation that the Blood Center did to this committee on November 17th. And with the knowledge now of what we know, and there were just a few parts I'd like to quote very quickly, and I will be quick. At 29:15 of the presentation, one of the architects, Lisa Gold, said, one of the big goals of this project is to create a much more humane human experience. At 30:30 in the presentation, she said, the park, we all know and love it. It's the social heart for the neighborhood. And later on at 37:30, another architect, Peter Schuber, also of Enid, said, and this one's hard to believe, but it's there for anyone who wants to go look at it. One of the things we tried very hard to do was to keep the building as low as possible. After watching again that presentation, I realized it was just so connected to the reality of the damage that the Blood Center can do to the character and the quality of this neighborhood that any reasonable person can only come to one conclusion, that the Blood Center's 334-foot mid-block commercial tower is without doubt a QAnon rezoning proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Let's see, Betty Cooper Wallerstein.
Go ahead, Betty. You'll have to press.
Hello. Hello, am I on?
Yep, you are.
Okay. Yes, I had to step away for a moment, but when I came back, I think it was Barbara Chalky, because my question had to do with where is the consultant on the 210, and has he been paid? It's been a very long time, and I haven't heard anything back. Was that your question, Barbara?
Yes, it was her question.
Okay, so I think, can we possibly be able to get somebody to answer that? I guess it was Will that I was going to ask.
Yes, and unfortunately, yeah, go ahead, Max.
Oh, sorry, Anthony. Betty, I'm not sure if you'd stepped away before, but Will was having some difficulties with his computer earlier as well. If you were here, he was kind of cutting in and out when he was speaking, and so we're not quite sure what's going on.
Would you have any information, Max?
No, actually, that is.
It's been a long time. Does anybody have any information on it?
Unfortunately, I don't, but I'm sure an update will be provided in the near term.
Okay.
Anthony, Gail Barron might be able to answer that question.
Gail, are you there?
Yes, she is.
Okay, thank you.
Could you there?
Go ahead. Okay.
Hi, Betty. We have been following up. Apparently, Will has been having difficulty with the borough president's office, with some of the city systems, whereby the contract has to be basically sent to them and using their system. There are a lot of issues. I'm not really aware of where it stands now. 3 weeks ago, I did write to Will for another update. Russell Squire, as the chair of the community board, has determined that he will do the follow-ups on this. I have made it very clear on behalf of the Zoning and Development Committee that we're extremely distressed that here we are, we have the money, it is there, we have the money in the community board budget. We also have the money from the discretionary $10 from council member Kalos. And frankly, the year is almost over. And we think that it reflects very poorly on us. But the most important thing from a moral commitment is the consultant is supposed to be paid. And if he's had to now stop work, then we really get delayed in moving forward with the 210, which is critical. And we don't look particularly professional when it comes to city planning. So I, for one, happen to be extremely distressed about this. And I'm hoping that Russell is able to work with Will, make some phone calls, and ultimately come out with a solution to the issue.
Great. Thanks, Gail. Valerie.
Thanks, Anthony. I just 2 points I want to make about the blood center. The first is that this committee, and as you pointed out, the full board in an overwhelmingly positive vote voted against the blood center. I think maybe at most there were 5 members who were not willing to sign on to that resolution. And so we are on public record, Community Board 8, as being opposed to the blood center. We don't have to wait for ULURP or anything like that. We've already gone on record. And I just want to make that clear because we were at some public meetings where that was a little bit unclear. So 60 people on this call right now, that it should be clear that we're against that. The second thing is, I mean, this is a battle that needs to get fought everywhere because on February 23rd, the blood center sent around a mailing to all of their donors, misrepresenting what this project is and asking their donors to support them in the expansion of the blood center. They left out salient information, like they had to get a zoning variance, like the building is going to block the park light, sunlight. It was all about, the expansion of the great mission of the blood center. And while the blood center does do good work, I mean, they've basically got a very misleading statement out there asking for community support. So I would urge any donor or past donor or somebody who received that correspondence to reply to the blood center to tell them that they are aware that it's not as simple as the blood center makes it out to be, and that and the blood center should know that that kind of misleading statement being put out there in the community is not going to be left unchallenged. And that's all I want to say. I only have another question for you, which is at the Land Use Committee meeting, do we know whether our council people are coming and are going to be prepared to speak to the master plan? I didn't hear that. I heard that George James is coming, but are we going to make sure that our council people there so we can understand why they supported this?
It's a wonderful idea, and we can try and make sure they're there. We have Rita and Alita. So Rita.
Anthony, I'm now talking to architect Anthony. Could you ballpark as to how much money the developer for this enormous building has already put in preparation, in plans, in everything, what is a guesstimate as to how much has already been invested in this plan?
I couldn't possibly guess beyond probably tens of millions of dollars, but
Okay, so we're talking tens of millions of dollars. That's good enough for me, because I'm not going to buy the building, nor am I going to sell it. It's very interesting that when a developer spends the millions of dollars that he has spent to date, that he has some wink and a nod from somewhere that he is going to get what he wants. And I'm scared. I have been on the board only about 11 or 12 years, it seems longer, that I've never, ever heard of any study that any developer did that was pro what they wanted, that the study didn't come out exactly as they wanted. And I have EIS, there'll be a traffic study, there'll be an environmental study, there'll be every kind of study. Every study will come out perfect, except when they build it, as with MSK at 73rd Street, when we said it's gonna, the traffic. They said, oh, no, there's no traffic. Of course, now what are they yelling? They have no place to park their cars, or patients parking. So I just wanted for all of us to be realistic as to how much has already been spent on this project. Thank you.
thank you, Rita. Alita? Yes.
Thanks, Anthony. I just want to remind everyone that we don't know what the financing situation is like here, that Longfellow is a for-profit builder. We don't know what kinds of tenants they'll have. There's no obligation that they maintain it as a lab facility. We don't know that it won't eventually become an office building if they're unable to rent this. There's no reason for it. There's no transparency for it. And from the top down and the bottom up, it's really a problem. And both Kasira, the very powerful lobbyist, and the Blood Center need to be much more transparent. It also says on the cover page that they're partners, and so we know nothing about that at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Alita. Let's see, Marco?
Thank you. My perception about the Blood Center is they saw, and that is what my discussion was before, they saw that all the corridor of the hospitals, they find out rather to buy more land and build more hospitals, it's easier to take the air rights. So the Blood Center perceived that they had the right to do the same. Therefore, but the problem of them is they don't need it, but they want to have it, the air rights, so they can do something, so sell it. So they are in the real estate business because it's not for the research that they need. It's just only to sell that air rights to the developer. So we have a pattern in our community that the medical institutions, they come in and they ask air rights. This is one of the great incentives to create large quantity of jobs and excessive against other communities that are in the press. So the point right here, I found it that the Blood Center said, I don't need it, but I had to do exactly what the whole medical institution did. Therefore, since I don't need it, I'm going to sell it. And the air rights, they don't have the air rights. If that's the case, everybody can go and ask the same. But this is the concept of planning. This is in our community, we don't have planning. The only thing you have is a Euler. They use very well the developers. We don't use actually for our benefit. It's the developer they use it for their own benefits and financial benefits in this case,
Yes.
Clearly. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. There was one other agenda item, which is Lennox Hill. But as there is no particular news from them, hopefully we will be able to provide an update at our meeting on the 23rd. So if there is, I believe, a potential piece of new business that Alita wanted to bring up. And so Max, if you could,
sure.
Just
Thanks,
as a kind
Anthony.
of announcement.
Thanks, Anthony, and thanks, Max. I want to ask if the committee would consider the small business zoning that both Gail Brewer has talked about, and I believe Ben Kalos has as well, where storefronts are zoned to support the kinds of businesses that are mom and pop businesses, not the half block long banks and the drugstores, as a way to try and preserve mom and pops. There is the former chair of CB7 who has talked to me very briefly about the success of that program. And so I think that it would be useful to at least examine its appropriateness for this community. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that makes sense, and we'll bring it up, at a future meeting. Oh, now everybody wants to talk. Okay. All right, Michelle.
Yeah, this was exactly the zoning that we had on 86th Street all those many years ago. And the proposal was to increase the permissible size of the storefronts in order to encourage, not only big box stores, but just those kinds of commercial enterprises that need a lot of window frontage. I fought it tooth and nail along with the original East 86th Street Merchants Residents Association. As you know, it was to no avail. So I would be very interested in this proposal, but my question is anything written yet aside from this vague idea? Is there a proposal? Is there a bill? Is there anything?
No, there's actually, where'd I read it? There's zoning somewhere.
So how can we get a hold of that? So Alita's waving her hands. Can you get a copy of that to us?
Yes. Alita?
Thank you. CB7, it was enacted, I think, when Gail Brewer was council member in her district. So there must be something specific about that in writing. I'll talk to CB7 and see what information they're willing to share for specifics about it. And
does it have to be proposed community board by community board? Or are they looking for some kind of citywide? Are they looking for location? Because then it would differ.
It would differ. There's nothing right now that we would have that applies to us. Also, which avenues, which cross streets, if any. So it needs a discussion, and I'm only asking that it be discussed and looked at, and possibly a resolution in support of it at some future meeting.
Well, I would be very interested in that, but in order to vote in support of it, I would need to see specific language. You've heard me say this before, I don't like to vote on concepts. I would like to see language in front of me, and then we would either stand behind it, amend it, or whatever. So I would be very eager to have that put on a future agenda, but have the
and we'll
information
provide
to support it.
Yes, we'll gather the information, or
Great.
Ask Max to help us get it and do that and send that. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Make sure everybody has it before we meet. Elaine, you are gesticulating. No, now there you go.
A number of years ago, and I have to go back, it could be 8, the zoning committee did look at what was happening on the west side. There is a report. The office should have it. One of the issues was that there were some implementation issues, and we were asked not to move forward. But there definitely is a report done by the west side. There were some complications. Indeed, Gail was a city council person. So if the staff can go back, I would think it was when Terry Slater and I co-chaired, that we had it as an agenda item and there would be material back then. It could be 7 to 8 years ago. So if we know the West Side implemented it, then we were the next year talking about it. So there are records on it, Michelle. There's no legislation, but it is by community because each one is different. So yes, that would be super.
Okay, great. Thank you, Elaine. We hopefully have come to the end of our agenda. And does anyone move that we adjourn?
Anthony, I'm sorry, I'm still unmuted, but Betty Cooper Wallerstein has her hand up, I see.
Oh, okay.
Betty, it's going to be *6.
Thank you very much. I just had a quick question for Valerie. Valerie, you were saying that the blood center sent out information that was not correct. Did they say anything that was the wrong for the vote that we made at this at our meeting, that that CB8, did they quote CB8 as wrong? Are you still there, Valerie?
She is, but she is currently muted.
I'm looking for, oh, I see. Sorry, Valerie, it took me a minute. Go ahead.
Hi. No, Betty, they didn't mention CB8 at all. They basically glossed over the fact that, they can't just build a new blood center, and that, it was just, you would have thought this was just, they came up with an idea, they're building up in their space and there's no issue whatsoever. It doesn't say why they need you to hit the button and say that they support this project. If you say yes, it's completely misleading. I mean, why would they need you to hit a button to say that you support the project and ask for your name and address if it was just so great? I mean, it's just completely misleading in its context. So.
Okay, thank you, Valerie. Sure. That was what.
Okay, now, do we have a motion to adjourn? I see Sherry. I see Michelle.
Oh, Rita as well. Yep.
Yes, and Rita, second. Rita. So I believe that we are, for the next almost 3 weeks, adjourned. Thank you.
Good night.